Hello and welcome to North 100, a Canadian Highlander podcast. A reminder, this podcast is brought to you by you. Your support of the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. My name is Serge. Joining me as always, I have a Wheeler.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Jer.
Hello.
And today we have a special guest, Blake.
Long-time listener, first-time caller.
Ooh, and we don't have many callers. You're our second guest ever in the 127 episode history of our show thus far.
Who was the first?
Allison, long time, also kind of a control player. She talked extensively about an archetype called The Rock, and it was wonderful. And it was also like 100 episodes ago. So it's been a while. Now, Blake, if people aren't familiar with who you are, really quickly, introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I work for Wizards of the Coast. I am, my title is Senior Communications Manager, and that means I have oversight over a bunch of stuff. I manage the community team. I'm in charge of our content. I work with our PR team really closely. Basically, if we do words that are about Magic the Gathering, I deal with them in some form or fashion. That includes preview plans, content. I used to do a lot of esports coverage back in the day. I don't do that so much anymore. And I do a weekly show called appropriately Weekly MTG every Thursday on twitch.tv/magic. There's my plug, where we usually share a bunch of news. Sometimes we do fun shows, but we'll talk about kind of the issues or the news of the week.
Oh, fantastic. And I mean, obviously for Canadian Highlander, what's your history with the format?
Yeah, it was introduced to Canadian Highlander, I want to say like 6 years ago now, but that might be off by a year or two in either direction. Marshall Sutcliffe actually introduced me.
No way.
Yeah, so back when I did coverage and was on every Pro Tour, we played a lot of Magic. And Marshall had picked up Canadian Highlander from you fine folks and brought it down to the Pro Tour coverage team. And we're generally a competitive lot. And so we, for a while at least, a lot of us switched from playing Commander to playing Canadian Highlander as our format of choice between, work at the Pro Tour events. So he showed me a deck. It was full of awesome cards. I think he had a Sultai deck at the time. And I immediately changed one of my spikier Commander decks into a Canadian Highlander deck and just kind of kept going.
That's fantastic. Now, what kind of archetypes do you like to play in the format?
I almost exclusively play blue cards. And I play a lot of control. The 4 decks I currently have built, I have a Sultai control deck, I have blue-white control, I have Jeskai Tempo, and then I have your kind of Protean Hulkish deck.
All blue control decks. Wheeler, yeah.
The Protean Hulk is not a Flash Hulk. That's Abzan. That's my one
Your pattern rector deck?
pattern rector. Yep.
Sandy B.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
It's my change of pace deck when I'm tired of using blue cards.
I don't know the feeling.
Yeah.
To each their own, I suppose.
I don't play it very often, to be fair.
Fair enough. And I think a very exciting thing, since we have a new person on the show, let's do something we haven't done in a very long time. Let's talk about the best card you're not playing. Today, Blake, why don't you share a card that you're excited about in the format that you think is criminally underplayed currently?
Yeah, I've actually been playing this card for as long as I've been playing Canadian Highlander. It's one of my blue cards. And the card is Future Sight. It is, if you're not familiar, a blue enchantment for 5 mana total, 2 and 3 blue, that just says play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play the top card of your library. Pretty simple. It's been a really powerful card for a really long time, but it's overlooked in a lot of formats, not just ours. Back in the day when it was first printed, it was usually a combo card, part of a deck called Tight Sight.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I used a lot of untap effects, and it sought to get Future Sight in play and then just basically play its entire library. And then, how it killed the opponent, it didn't matter.
I just took a drag off of a giant cigarette and thinking that's a name I haven't heard in a while.
I've been playing Magic for a real long time, so
Yeah.
I can go in the Wayback Machine anytime.
That's a BDM special right there.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, the first time I played Future Sight in a tournament was in my Grixis control deck, which was my first Highlander deck and the one I played the longest. And the first time I played it, I got some weird looks, and I was very confused because I was relatively new to Canadian Highlander at the time. And like people were coming up to me throughout the tournament and saying, "Are you the guy who's playing Future Sight?" And it was very strange to me because I'm like, this card is
What?
busted. Yeah, and when I've looked through lists, I think the difference is I don't play it in combo decks. It's a staple of some combo decks because you're trying to churn through a bunch of cards all at the same time, and Future Sight lets you do that effectively and see more cards constantly. But I tend to play it in control decks because, and we'll talk about this today, not to lead the story we're going to go through, but you really need some card advantage engines that put you over the top. You know, divination doesn't do it. You need to draw a lot of cards, and Future Sight does come with a little bit of a drawback that you're broadcasting what you're doing, but it just doesn't matter because you're drowning your opponent in cards. And the drawback to this card is that you are paying 5 mana for an enchantment that does nothing when it comes into play most of the time. If it's late game, sometimes it will, but if you're looking to play this on turn 5, you're crossing your fingers that your opponent isn't doing anything or just immediately destroying it. But if you untap with this, it's incredibly hard to lose. You're going to hit all of your land drops. Your cantrips are going to be amazing. If you have something like Sylvan Library in play, you're just going to speed through your deck. You know, combine this with Jason the Mind Sculptor and forget it. There's no coming back from that. So it's incredibly powerful, but I don't see it very much. And every time I've played it, I've gotten kind of surprised, shocked reactions from my opponent before they lose to it.
I like the little bit of spice at the end there. All right, well, I think Blake hinted to it a little bit. Since you're a control player and Jer's a control player and Wheeler plays everything, let's focus this on control decks, maybe specifically building control decks, and let's establish some credentials here. What exactly are our control pedigrees? So Blake, you said you've got 4 decks, 3 of which are control, and you're just a control player? Like you bleed control?
Generally, in like every format, I don't understand aggro. I can do mid-range, I can do combo, but my first competitive deck here, Wheeler, I'm going to take in the Wayback Machine again, was Browse Post. And yeah,
Jesus.
yeah. So Browse Post, for those of you who aren't familiar, is an alliances era standard deck that
Type 2.
Type 2. Whose win condition, singular, was Kjeldren Outpost.
Wait, the land that makes... Wait.
1/1 soldier tokens. Yep, that
What?
was the win condition. And the way, and generally speaking, the way you actually won was by locking your opponent out, and you would use a card called Soldivi Digger, which is from Alliances, 2 mana artifact, that for 2 mana, you can put target card in your graveyard on the bottom of your library, and then it used an enchantment, also from Alliances, called Browse. It was a 4 mana enchantment, 2 and 2 blue, that had an activated ability that for 2 and 2 blue, so 8 mana before you get to do anything. But when you activate it, you look at the top 5 cards of your library, you put 1 into your hand, and you exile the next 4. So the deck would use like Wrath of God, Swords of Plowshares, Force of Will, sometimes like Arcane Denial, stuff like that. And it would control the board, and then it would work its way through the library with Browse until between Browse and Soldivi Digger, you could put whatever card you needed or wanted from your graveyard, usually a counterspell or Swords of Plowshare or something like that, back into your library, which at that point was like 2 or 3 cards deep, and you just always have access to what you needed, and then you could finish them off with Kjeldren Outpost at any time. So that's I came to love Thawing Glaciers from that, which is another amazing control card from that era that doesn't see a ton of play anymore. But that became my kind of whole mentality. How much can I bend before I break and before I take over? And I really enjoy that challenge of trying to forecast what my opponent's going to do, what I can allow them to get away with for a little bit until I need to stop them. And that is always really appealing to me.
Fascinating. Jer, longtime listeners of the show will know that you favor control. Want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I mean, I've played probably most control decks there are in the format. I've even experimented with a lot of non-blue lists. tap out, reactive, like literally no win conditions. You name it, I've probably played it.
Awesome. And Wheeler, tell us about you and Control.
I'm on, well, I enjoy a good Seinfeld, but also if I'm playing Control, it's got to be Jeskai, baby. It's got to be or Sultai. Actually, I kind of fell in love with Sultai a couple of years ago, but mostly Jeskai. Jeskai Control is there's something about Lightning Helix and Force of Will that it's hard to beat in more ways than one.
All right, let's talk about building control decks. And correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think the most interesting problem you're trying to solve when you're constructing a control deck is defining the problem you're trying to solve, if that makes sense. Blake, when you're building a control deck, when you're sitting down to do it, like, what is the rationale? What are you trying to do?
I mean, to use your parlance, you're trying to solve all the problems, and it's that sounds a little facetious, but that's really what you're trying to do is build your deck in such a way that whatever your opponent throws at you, you have an answer, because control decks are at their heart answer decks, and that's why you see, Jared was talking about even some non-blue control decks. The reason blue is so popular is because something like Counterspell doesn't care what the threat is. It just cares that it is a threat. And so you're really trying to build your deck in a way that you can solve all of the problems that are going to be thrown at you. Now, what those problems are is a problem in and of itself. So Jerry and I actually played in a tournament before the world ended down here that was a team trios tournament. And I played my Grixis control deck at the time. And one of the things we did before the event was sit down, talk about the decks we expected, and then make some swaps. And, for Jared's deck and the other deck, we made a couple swaps based on what we expected. For Grixis, I think we made upwards of like 12, 15 swaps or something like that. And that's because we decided what we thought the problems were going to be and then address that. And it's such a wide swath of things in Canadian Highlander that you have to be able to answer, that you're looking for things that answer the broadest spectrum of things in one card or a few cards.
Yeah, and to clarify, we made the swaps not because Blake's build was bad or incorrect. It's just because you have to do that for a control deck if you have knowledge of what you expect. That's such an advantage playing a control deck. Like, the hardest thing about playing a control deck is trying to, as Blake and Serge have mentioned, answer all the problems. If you can narrow down the problems you're going to have to deal with, that makes the control archetype a lot more powerful.
Yeah, I'll use a specific example in there that we did. Is I don't particularly personally like the card Spell Snare. It's obviously very strong, but it's a little, when I talk about having broad answers, it's sometimes too narrow. I mean, I've found myself staring at Spell Snare in my hand, wishing it were anything else way too often.
Real quick, what's Spell Snare?
Spell Snare is a 1-mana blue instant that says counter target spell with converted mana cost 2.
Yeah, it seems a little narrow.
It is, but it's also very strong. Like, every deck has spells that cost 2 mana, but when you expect, for example, a lot of aggro, Spell Snare is one, a counter spell, which already has a little bit of baggage with it because it doesn't deal with the battlefield, and two, it might not be the specific right counter spell at the right time. It's very powerful when you have it on turn 1 on the draw, for example, but it can be a little awkward. But what we expected for that tournament was a lot of blue decks. That's what Jared and others had seen the day before. It's what we kind of expected to show up, and blue decks are just rife with 2-mana instants, and you will have an opportunity against blue decks to use that card at some point. It's not going to be a dead card because of that. So we put it in the deck. There are other metagames I wouldn't play it in the deck, and generally speaking, if I'm going into an unknown metagame, I don't play it in the deck, but we definitely played it there. And
Out of curiosity, how'd you guys do at that event?
I was the highest finishing American. Yeah.
That's
huge.
It was the all-Canadian team final. Blake gets the honorary status.
I was an honorary Canadian for a day. We finished second to some young up-and-comers. It was good to see them, shine for a day.
Yeah.
For a day.
None of them won the singles event, so.
Whoa. Well, we were too busy to practice. We were too busy to win the singles event.
that you all played in, yeah.
Well, we had to make sure that Pro Tour Day 2 competitor Noel Robin was sufficiently full of American fast food and Jack in the Box and stuff. And so,
Blake, I still think about that breakfast I got
I was thinking about that the other day too. That breakfast was amazing.
Yeah.
I bet I could find if that place is still open. I 100% could find it again.
Yeah.
Let me circle us back to the problem of control. So it doesn't seem like it's not reasonable to make a deck that answers everything, is it?
I mean, no, you have to hedge in certain areas, and often like it goes to say like you're often not including cards like disenchant in your deck because or Blake, the spell snare example is a good one. It's like you control decks can't afford to have dead cards because they're a reactive deck, so you need to have as many options as possible, and those options need to be usable. Like the reason you're playing control is you want a decision heavy game, and you believe that you can navigate those decisions better than your opponent can. And so if you're limiting your decisions by having narrow cards in your hand that only have one use case that may or may not come up, you're inhibiting sort of the core game plan of the archetype.
Yeah, a really good example of that are wrath effects or, damnation. And I heard Jared talking about this on a previous show, how like Wrath of God has started moving out of his white-based control decks because it's even against some decks with creatures, something like Damnation, which is 2 and 2 black sorcery, destroy all creatures. They can't be regenerated. Against some mid-range decks, that's a 4 mana terminate or just a 4 mana kill a creature. Or if the problem is a planeswalker, it doesn't address the planeswalker. And so those are the kind of cards that are really powerful in the right scenario and super mediocre in others.
Well, this moves us nicely into probably a second part of building control deck, which is what kind of control deck? Now, does that change when you're looking at the type of problems you're trying to solve, or do you think those are two completely separate questions?
They are and they aren't. I mean, Canadian Highlander is full of a ton of powerful reactive cards. And so some cards are always going to make that threshold. Like you are not going to play a white-based control deck and not play Swords to Plowshares. It doesn't matter what your white-based control deck is. You're playing Swords to Plowshares. So there are some cards that at a level are always going to make it in. But then there are others. So we'll use Damnation as an example. There are control builds that are more creature heavy. So I'll use my current Sultai build as an example. Actually, you know what? I'll use the Jeskai build as an example. So the Jeskai build has quite a number of creatures. It also has things like Lightning Helix, Lightning Bolt, those pinpoint flexible removal spells that are great in almost any scenario. That deck doesn't play Wrath of God because your answer to creatures in that scenario is either your pinpoint removal or other creatures. So yes, the makeup of the control deck definitely matters for some of the reactive cards, but for some of the other reactive cards like Counterspell, 2 blue mana Counterspell, you're just gonna play that. It's just that good. But for cards, the last 20 cards or something like that, yeah, the texture of your deck is definitely gonna matter.
I think at the end of my Jeskai control spree, I was down to playing just Terminus because I had like a Mystical Tutor and Treat the Angels package. Just Terminus, and I think I was only barely holding on to Supreme Verdict as like a response to all the Victoria control players that just want to like Tarmogoyf, Loxodon, Smiter, Wrath of God themselves. And so you just...
Ouch. That hurts.
That's a cold shot at Jared!
I mean, no, well, I mean, I use that example...
I won several tournaments with that deck, I'll have you know.
Yeah, that's why I had to deal with it. But it wasn't just you. It was Sutherland as well. And like Josh would do that kind of stuff too occasionally. And you just kind of needed it. And often Verdict felt more like they were Wraths, but like Terminus was a bit more of a, well, I get to do this at instant speed or, in a way for such a small amount of mana that it can really cause you problems.
Yeah, you can like Terminus plus Jace on the same turn, which is it's just like the game's over.
And even Supreme Verdict at times felt like kind of it was just a giant version of like an Electrolyzer, an Arc Trail, of like I might be killing 2 creatures. One of those creatures might not even be super relevant, but I need to deal with them without my opponent being able to stop that.
Destroy target true name nemesis.
Yeah, exactly.
Especially if you play in the same tournament every week, you can get a lot of leverage and advantage by changing up the cards in your deck each week. Like there were weeks where I'd be playing control for several weeks in a row, and I'd like alternate weeks that I'd put Settled to Wreckage in my deck, so like people would see it and then play around it, but the next week it wasn't even in my deck, and then I'd gain like 8 life over the course of a game against a mid-range deck because they were only attacking with half their creatures playing around a card that wasn't in my deck.
That's evil.
That's just smart.
But it's how you have to play control decks a lot of the time. You have to find ways for your opponent to outplay themselves in some ways. You know, that's the advantage of playing decks with typically a lot of instants, is they have to decide, am I playing around Settle the Wreckage, or am I playing around Cryptic Command? Am I playing around Counterspell or Remand? And that's a lot of the advantage of playing Counterspell decks, because you have that kind of mind game you can play.
And it goes back to the whole sort of the core principle of control decks for me is having a decision intensive game and creating ways for either your opponent to make mistakes or giving yourself openings to make correct decisions in tough spots.
I really like that. All right. At what point, like, we're looking at different types of control decks. For a while, I remember Wheeler talked about the Jeskai list that he was piloting being mid-range and not control. Like, where does that line start or stop?
When I cut Mantis Rider. Like that deck kind of went through, you know, a bit of an evolution, I guess. Like the points in the format also shifted a bit, and we saw new cards printed that kind of just made Find the Recall really powerful. And you could still do that with Jeskai midrange, and it's great, but it just led to, like, it would feel kind of awkward tapping out for, you know, something that just died, like a 3-drop that could just get bolted, or like casting Brim as at the time didn't feel that great, let's put it that way. And so I like, when you start trimming those purely, I say purely proactive, but that's kind of the strength of a deck like Jeskai, where like if you have a Brim as that's able to attack and block, which it usually can, it's doing double duty. But ultimately, you know, a Jeskai mid-range deck is more inclined with killing the opponent and being a bit more forceful, you know, playing like lightning strikes and whatnot. And so trimming the Mantis Riders, trimming the lightning strikes and replacing them with like, okay, I still have my bolts, but I would rather play a different kind of different piece of disruption, right? Like a magmatic sinkhole or whatnot.
So you're gonna need to go over that one real quick. What now?
Magmatic sinkhole. It's from Modern Horizons. It's the 5 in a red. It's an instant. It's got Delve. It deals 5 damage to a target creature or planeswalker.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah.
you, like a Jeskai control deck, at least the build back then was still able to pressure your opponent, still be able to do the flashy like end of turn bolt you, Snapcaster flashback bolt, kill you with like a Chandra Torch of Defiance uptick or whatever. But you kind of said like, well, I'm getting old, I'm getting tired, maybe I'll slide back in the saddle a bit and make sure I'm not dying to, you know, a big dumb 5-drop or whatever. Like you start playing more stuff that's defensive, protective even.
Just wondering where those boundaries exist.
Well, and like in the control version, you're playing Torrential Gearhulk. In the mid-range version, you're less likely to play it.
Yeah, I like to think of it as, if you're playing creatures whose only job is to attack and block, you're not a control deck, with maybe Tarmogoyf being an exception. As an example, one of the cards it's kind of been popping in and out of my Sultai control deck just because I want to try it out, but it's not the type of card I usually put in a deck like this, is Murktide Regent, which is a Modern Horizons 2 card, and so it's pretty recent. It kind of has done a lot of work in Modern lately, so I'm trying it out. But it's a blue dragon for 5 and 2 blue, which is not its actual casting cost, because it has Delve. It's a 3/3 flyer that when it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each instant and sorcery card exiled with it, and then whenever an instant or sorcery card leaves your graveyard, put a +1/+1 counter on Murktide Regent. So it's just a big dumb. It kills really fast. It's really cheap, but it just attacks and blocks. And it's the kind of creature I really loathe to put in a control deck. But on the other side of things, my deck does a lot of delving. And so it does kill really fast. And it is the kind of thing where you can play it one turn and oftentimes, you know, swing in and kill them the next turn.
Yeah, it's the kind of card that's just so good you kind of can't afford to not put it in your deck if you're like trying to play the optimal version.
On one hand, it's just a big idiot. On the other hand, it's what if Tombstalker were an 8/8 that you could pitch to Force of Will that also just gets bigger?
Right.
And you
Yeah.
didn't need to put swamps in your deck.
Yeah.
Well, then, important question: how are you winning games if creatures can neither attack nor block? Then how are you closing them out?
So there are, some of it is you just end up winning with whatever you have lying around because you take away all your opponent's options. That's sort of the classic control model. That's what I was talking about with Browse Post, is you just kind of have a thing in there, and it by, purely wearing your opponent down, you end up winning with attacking with a 1/1 for 20 turns. Modern Magic isn't really like that anymore. Now you can just win by like attacking with a Vendilion Click and an Eternal Witness and a Snapcaster Mage for a couple turns and winning. But I tend to, in Canadian Highlander and other high-powered formats, I tend to like to have a combo finish or a creature that can kill real fast. And so that's why I like Murktide Regent. My Sultai deck is currently playing the Thassa's Oracle combo because it's cheap, it's flexible. You want those types of finishers to have multiple uses. Like Thassa's Oracle it's fine as a 1/3 blocker that scries for 2, and you can find a way to regrow it later. It also has that oops, I win on turn 3 kind of potential. But the other cards in that combo are just tutors. They're just solid cards that you're going to play.
Real quick, do you want to give an example what the combo is, just if people aren't familiar?
Yeah, so it's Thassa's Oracle and an Empty Library is the combo. But the ways you get there, and there are a number of ways. Demonic Consultation is from Ice Age. It's a black instant for a single black mana. You name a card, and then you remove the top 6 cards of your library from the game, reveal them, and then you start going through your library card by card until you reveal the named card. And so you play Thassa's Oracle. In response, you Demonic Consultation for,
Sarpadian Empires, Volume 7.
Yeah, Stormcrow, whatever.
Yeah, this is my favorite. Yeah, what card do you name that is
What's
in your
your
deck?
favorite card to name?
Honestly, like most of the time I name Black Lotus.
Oh.
Ben can't do that.
No, Ben can't do that.
I mean, I will, and I have, and I will continue to do that.
Jer?
I name a Johnny Collar of the Pride typically, but
Nice.
Hunted Wumpus. It's my favorite.
All right. Oh, we interrupted you. Sorry. Go ahead, Blake.
You can also, and the nice thing about that is it's got multiple pieces that all work as well. Like Tainted Pact is really similar to Demonic Consultation that just has a small deck building cost. You've got the Jace Planeswalker that mimics Thassa's Oracle and also lets you win with an empty library. So there are a number of cards that are all flexible that you're totally fine playing on their own. And that's one of the reasons I like that. But also, it's as Wheeler's fond of saying, it's 2021. We have all these cards that do everything. And like one of the reasons I switched to Sultai was Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath.
Oh, God.
Like that card it literally does everything. It draws cards. I like doing that in control decks. It gains life.
Yeah.
I need to do that in control decks. It plays extra lands. I need to do that in control decks. It attacks for 6. I need to do that at some point.
and then it does all the other things again.
And then it does it again. Like it's
every turn.
it's just it does everything. Yeah.
It's my favorite of the commands.
Yeah.
I love the look on my opponent's face the first time I attacked with it. They were a mono red player, and they're like, they just didn't understand. They were like, he does that every turn. I'm like, yeah, like you lose. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So there, the theme here is that you want your win conditions to also be flexible. When I originally built Grixis Control, I started with a Splinter Twin Kiki kind of shell, and I just slowly moved away from it because the individual pieces were so bad. Like I never really wanted to just Pestermite my opponent or Deceiver Exarch my opponent. It's not the way I play. It's not the way I play Control, and trying to graft that sort of combo onto a Control deck didn't really work. But the Thassa's Oracle combo, all the pieces are just individually good and totally playable on their own, independent of the combo.
So when you're building a control deck, do you start with your win con and work backwards, or do you start how does the win con factor into that decision?
For me, it's an afterthought.
Me too. Yeah, it's a
Victory is inevitable.
yeah.
Whoa.
And it kind of has to be, right? Like if you're building a control deck and we're looking at this through the scope of I'm trying to win as many matches of Magic as possible, you kind of have to assume, you have to have a mindset of like, I'm here to win, and I should also just try to win as much as possible. And I'm probably winning more off the back of Thoughtseize, Ancestral Recall, Lightning Bolt, and Counterspell than I am of like any Dorcas on the board that can attack for 3, you know? And so it's, you kind of just will pick however you want to kill them based off of like what you want your deck to fulfill, like any kind of holes that you might have, or like ways that might be a bit difficult for your opponent to interact with, you know? But ultimately, I mean, Recall and Bolt and Counterspell, those are probably just good enough to win the game by themselves.
Isn't there sort of a weird point where you have to ask yourself, how do you win? You don't just like look at a pile of cards and you think like, oh no, I forgot to include a win con?
Yeah, you do. But the nice thing about some of the best control cards is that they take care of that on their own. You know, Snapcaster still attacks for 2. Torrential Gearhulk, it's a 5/6. Like, I'm playing that card regardless. You know, a lot of my, one of the reasons I switched to Sultai was Deathrite Shaman. It kills opponents eventually.
Jace the Mind Sculptor's a classic control win condition.
Yep. Teferi, Hero of Dominaria. You know, it takes forever, and your opponent basically has to be the most stubborn human ever. But Teferi, Hero of Dominaria is an actual win condition, assuming you have 3 hours to finish the game. And so a lot of the time, it's building out how you want to control the game and then looking at what you have and identifying, do you have enough win conditions? Are these the right win conditions? If not, then you fill in those holes.
I love it. All right, an important question that is very unique to Canadian Highlanders, of course, the points list that we have here. Much like win cons, these are often the more powerful cards in your deck. How do you decide which points to include?
Well, if you're playing blue, you start with Ancestral Recall.
Yeah, every time? Is that
No, that's not necessarily true, but that's typically it's one of the reasons you play control in this format is because Ancestral Recall is a card that you're allowed to play, and you're allowed to play a bunch of tutors, and it's just like a sort of fun, iconic thing you can do in this format that you don't get to do many other places, and it's a viable, like, optimal strategy. So
yeah, that's not wrong. That's kind of how I've started. Like, is this an Ancestral Recall deck? If not, why? Okay. If not, then I start filling it in with, honestly, I look first to Dig Through Time and Treasure Cruise. If it's not going to be an Ancestral Recall deck, I'm going to try to approximate that, and usually Mana Drain as well. Again, if I'm not doing any of the big points cards, those kind of 1 point blue cards, blue staples, are almost certainly going to go in. And then, I look at, so for example, the Sultai deck, I ended up making room for Gifts Ungiven because it's a 1 card way to set up your combo. And so there's a little bit of texture, but yeah, I think Jared's right. You start with the question of Ancestral Recall. If yes, go this direction. If no, go this direction.
I don't know, Blake. I mean, out of curiosity, your Sultai build, did you pivot to Sultai before like Oracle combo kind of started picking up as a thing control decks were doing, or?
No. So I actually had started testing Oracle combo in Grixis. The reason I switched to Sultai is pretty benign. I just kept wanting to add green cards. Deathrite Shaman and Uro were the top 2 on that list.
Oko, perhaps.
Oko as well. Those were, yeah,
above average Magic cards.
Above average Magic cards that I wanted to play. And so at first I was like, well, I could splash some green in here, but Grixis's big weakness is its mana base and its inability to gain life. So like the red matchup is really bad. It's winnable, but it's really bad. Deathrite Shaman, Uro, and Oko, almost like that problem solved. Congratulations. And so I ended up, the red cards stopped being worth it. I had a little pang of sadness when Prismari Command was printed and I couldn't play it in a Grixis deck because I love that card and it does a lot of things. But yeah, at its core, both decks are black-blue control decks with either some red cards or some green cards. And the green cards are just stronger at this point.
I can't speak to what it's like now outside of, like, if you're a Sultai list and you say you're not playing the Oracle combo. I can't speak to whether or not this is like a question a lot of people are asking themselves, but I know that the Sultai list I ended up playing, I basically stole it from Pat Berdusco, local large ape, and player of Canadian Highlander. A very good Magic player. But his build of Sultai was just like Demonic Tutor and then good blue cards. Like the big blue spread, basically. And I remember him mentioning just like the fact that you, for Sultai especially, like that your Demonic Tutor could realistically solve whatever your opponent had or whatever your problem was, but also given your deck had, it's not exactly the sexiest line, but Demonic Tutor for a Tarmogoyf can very quickly kill people if needed.
Yep. Or Murktide Regent. Or
yeah, it's kind of a way that if people are a little, they go like, ooh, Ancestral Recall, Oracle combo, and God forbid they think about Time Vault. There are other ways you can DT spread with a whole bunch of goodies.
Yeah, Blake's also very familiar with Patty as the third person on our trios team.
Yep. God, the noise you just made me make when you described him as a large ape. It's like a snort and a laugh, and I started choking. Thank you for that, Wheeler.
Yeah, no worries.
All right, let's wrap this up with kind of a fun note, because we've all talked about how long we've been playing Magic, how long we've been playing the format, and established control players. So what is a card or win condition that you still have in your lists that nostalgia won't let you go, that common sense is telling you should probably be cut?
I mean, so unfortunately I did cut it, but I'm going to talk about it anyway. Cruel Ultimatum. I was playing that up through
God,
like 5 months ago. Cruel Ultimatum has been a pet card of mine forever, and in that tournament we've been talking about where we got second, I played Cruel Ultimatum. Like, Cruel Ultimatum was in my deck.
Real quick, what is it?
Oh yeah, I suppose I should describe the best 7 mana source. It's not even the best ultimatum anymore, unfortunately. Cruel Ultimatum is a 7 mana sorcery for 2 blue, 3 black, and 2 red. So
Easy to cast.
Real easy to cast. It's just, couple mana. It's a sorcery, and it says target opponent sacrifices a creature, discards 3 cards, then loses 5 life. You return a creature card from your graveyard to your hand, draw 3 cards, and gain 5 life. It's a long way of saying you win the game. Congratulations, but it's probably going to take a few more turns. I have cast that card and lost. It is rare, but I've been casting that card for a very long time from when it was in standard. It was an actual good card up till a couple of months ago when I finally moved away from Grixis control.
That's when it stopped being good.
No, it wasn't good long before that.
I thought you were about to say a couple years.
No. This tournament that we've been talking about was in 2019.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't move to Sultai till.
But you guys got to the finals. I assumed you wouldn't have been on Cruel Ultimatum if you got to the final. I'm sorry, I shouldn't be so rude about Cruel Ultimatum. It's hard to hate. Iconic Canlander card too.
Yeah, it's I built my decks around it. Like, the idea was you cast a bunch of cheap stuff and just kept hitting your land drops. And then when you got to 7 mana, I mean, this was my life game. When I talk about Grixis doesn't gain life, this was how I did it.
No.
This was often how I beat red decks, was I survived until I could cast this spell.
But not to date how long people have been playing the format and Cruel Ultimatum, it genuinely was the boogeyman of Canlander. Like, Grixis control, specifically with Cruel Ultimatum. Like, if you were against somebody that, like, a Grixis control deck, and you're like, oh, they played their Coalition Relic and had a bounce land. Oh no, they're going to hit 7 next turn. Like, you could just lose. You could get ultimatumed into the dirt.
This has been a powerful Magic story, but my favorite Cruel Ultimatum moment was my opponent cast Cruel Ultimatum into my open mana, and I'm a blue deck. I dual caster maged their Cruel Ultimatum, resolved it, drew mana drain off the Cruel, and got to mana drain their Cruel Ultimatum. It's one of the most ridiculous beatings I've ever delivered to somebody. It's just
But it feels like all the things I want to do in a control deck. Obviously, it draws cards. It puts you out of burn range. It takes away all of their options because Lord knows by that point they don't have more than 3 cards in their hand. It makes them sacrifice a creature. Hopefully that's the only creature on the board. Like, it is just such a, I'm not going to win yet, but there's no way that you're going to win at this point. card that I love the feeling of casting it. It's just it costs 7 mana. It's too expensive. It's too mana intensive. It doesn't do it anymore.
Jer, what are you holding on to?
I don't know. I have several. Some of my favorites are Primordial Mist. I love that card. That's kind of like the new school Future Sight.
I still have that in my deck. Not Sultai. I have it in blue-white.
I love this card. So it's also 5 mana, but it's much easier to cast. It's 4 and a blue enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, you may manifest the top card of your library, so that puts it onto the battlefield face down as a 2/2 creature. And if it's a creature, you can turn it face up at any point for its mana cost if it's a creature card. And it has an activated ability that lets you exile a face down permanent you control face up, and you may play that card this turn.
I thought this is the one that's like the Tabernacle.
That's
that's Pendrel.
Mist.
Sorry. P-Mist.
So this one's great because it's like a Future Sight that lets you... It A, doesn't show your opponent what card you're getting. B, it's actually a win condition because it makes a 2/2 every turn. And if you're also a control deck, sometimes that's good enough. And C, it lets you sort of like hide counter spells and kill spells on board, which is kind of fun. It does only ever get you 1 card a turn, unlike Future Sight, which when you untap with it, you're maybe getting like 3 or 4 cards a turn, which is absurd, but it does do something the turn you play it. Like, it does create a 2/2. So I think it's still somewhat defensible, but playing 5 mana for like a pretty dirtly enchantment these days is still kind of rough.
At our weekly event, I actually lost to a Jeskai control player that played Future Sight against me. I was baffled by them playing Future Sight, and then I was like, why aren't you just playing Primordial Mist? and now maybe they were way ahead of the game, or they should just play both.
Yeah. And the other card I wanted to bring up, which is a card I'm gonna play forever because of how much I love it, is Commence the Endgame. It's a 6 mana instant, 4 blue, can't be countered. You draw 2 cards and then create a zombie token army. I forget what the keyword is, but
you amass.
Yeah. You amass X, where X is the number of cards in your hand. And there's nothing I love more than playing a control mirror. And I have this card in my hand early, so I'm just the happiest to do nothing. And they're sitting there thinking they're happy to do nothing. And then I cast this card on turn 6 after hitting all my land drops, create an 8/8, and they're just like staring because I did this on their end step.
That's exactly the reaction I've had every time that card has been casting me. I just stare.
Yep. And it can't be countered, crucially. So there's nothing they can do. And they're just looking at like a bunch of lightning bolts and stuff. But yeah, it's magical if that happens, but it's also just a dirtily 6 mana spell that if you're playing against an aggro or mid-range deck, it's like a 3/3 or a 4/4. It's just kind of miserable. But
6 mana divination, go.
Come on, you of all people should get behind the 6 mana divination.
It's the 6 mana instant speed Muldrifter.
2 men argue about what's worse, 5 mana do nothing enchantment or 6 mana divination.
All right, well, Wheeler, your turn. What are you holding on to?
Am I allowed to say top? Sensei's top?
Wait, are we not playing top anymore?
Is that a win condition?
It is if you know how to use it. All right. Oh, now you're speaking my language. My actual 2. They'll pry the Sphinx's Revelation from my cold dead hands. Like, I will. Sphinx's Rev is one. Like, I adore this Magic card. It is. I think we're probably beyond this card, but it just feels so good. Like, I don't care how much mana I pump into it. I'll rev for 1 and I'll probably lose that game, but it'll feel great.
So remind us of the Sphinx's Revelation.
Yeah, it's X white, blue. It's an instant. You gain X life and you draw X cards. What else is there to love? But for an actual card that wins games occasionally, Maloku the Clouded Mirror.
Oh, yes.
That's a combo card. You're cheating.
No. I returned my Mystic Sanctuary to put my counter spell back on top.
Yeah, that's a combo.
It's a combo. It's a lock.
Yeah, that you can't lose. You can't include Maloku plus Mystic Sanctuary.
Hold on. Okay, fine. I don't even need the Mystic Sanctuary. I'll return my irrigated farmland.
Beautiful. All right, let's talk. Who's Moloku real quick?
Maloku. He's a strapping young lad at 4 and a blue for a 2/4, a Moonfolk wizard with flying. You can pay 1, return a land you control to your hand, or rather to its owner's hand, and you make a 1/1 blue illusion token with flying. It eats lightning bolt and craps thunder. And
Returns Mystic Sanctuary real good.
returning Mystic Sanctuary is why I say recently, but why I have played this card within the last year or so in control decks. Not every single build, but it does feel good occasionally. Like I had it in Sultai when I was on Courser of Crewfix and whatnot as well. That felt kind of nice. But it just like sometimes you're like, well, my hand is Force of Will, Force of Negation, and blue cards. Although Force of Negation not as good when you return all your lands to your hand and then Alpha Strike on your own turn. Yeah, this card does occasionally kill people. It blocks like the Brazen Borrowers and the Vendilion Cliques and whatnot. And I don't care what Blake and Jer say. Returning my Mystic Sanctuary to put Sphinx's Rev back on top is not a combo. It's a way of life.
All right, fair enough. Friends, any last things you want to add about building control decks? Any little notes of wisdom that you feel you didn't have a chance to contribute?
Learn to love Serum Visions.
I'll never love that card.
Yeah. Wait, Blake, are you on Team Serum Visions?
It's like the 8th bet. Okay, I'm on it for now, but you know what? When Consider comes out, it might be the one getting the cut.
Get it out of here.
Oh, that's like weeks away. Who cares? Like that's yeah.
What are you talking about? It's the next set. It's probably tomorrow.
Yeah. Consider, for those who don't know, is coming in Innistrad, but it's a blue mana instant for 1 mana that you basically surveil 1. It doesn't say surveil, but you surveil 1. So it can go to your graveyard instead of the bottom of your library, and then you draw a card.
Wow, that's really good.
It is really good.
Yeah. I mean, it's no Serum Visions, but that's really good.
For all these Delve decks, though.
Yep.
Right?
Oh, I've tried playing Catalog.
Wait, what?
Wait, am I thinking? I'm not thinking. No, sorry, Curate. I'm thinking of the wrong card.
Oh, thank God.
Curate, not Catalog.
I was about to say, Blake, no.
55 minutes down the drain.
One of them library blue things. Yeah, no, Curate, which is really, it's similar, but it's 2 mana.
All right, well, let's move to a segment we haven't done in a very long time, but some listeners might be excited to hear again. That's right. Let's do Powerful Magic. Okay, thank God one of you made some kind of noise. It's been so long. Today, Blake is going to tell us a magical story. Blake, take it away.
So I was actually going to tell a story about the time I bluffed Serge out of making a Merit Lage while I attacked for 3 for exactly 7 turns. But I don't remember all of the details of that story. I just remember, for some reason, I had him convinced, he was playing lands, not to make a Merit Lage token while I attacked with a Vendilion Click. And then as soon as he decided to make it, I had an answer. I don't remember what my answer was. And also at some point in there, I went from below 20 life to 21 life. And I remember this slumping the trap, but I don't remember the exact cards. It might have involved Cruel Ultimatum even, but either way, it was at a Magic Fest.
Who was the pro player?
It might have been. I think it might have been Vegas. Jerry Thompson.
Jerry, yeah. So Jerry wanted to play Highlander. I borrowed your deck. I beat Jerry with your deck, which is probably the biggest feather in my cap of Magic ever. You got mad that your deck lost and just absolutely wiped the floor with me.
That's right. Jerry borrowed the Grixis deck. Yeah. But yeah, you should have won that game had you made Merit Lage.
You got to make him have it. If you're playing against a control player, make him have it.
I didn't remember the details, so I had another story that involved Cruel Ultimatum anyway. So I'm gonna tell that one. So I was playing at a local tournament, and I was playing Grixis, and my opponent was playing like a Jund mid-range deck, and we went real long. We were the last match playing by a good 10-15 minutes, and we're in game 3 and we're going to turns, and we're both just top decking, and there's like a crowd gathered around, which is important for my memory because I remember people cheering. But I think the card I had in hand as we were like passing back and forth and doing nothing was like a Mana Leak, and we both had 1 million lands in play, so it was completely dead. So we get to, and my opponent was in the teens. They were at 13, exactly. And it's turn 4 of turns is their turn. I'm going to be turn 5. On their turn 4, I end step play Vendilion Click, and I target myself. And I put a leak on the bottom of my library, and I draw Cruel Ultimatum. And I quickly count all my mana and look in my graveyard, and sure enough, everything works out. So I untap, attack with Vendilion Click, put them down to 10. I look at my so of course, Cruel Ultimatum, very color intensive. I have to make sure like all the colors work out and everything, and miraculously they do. I cast Cruel Ultimatum, put them down to 5, and the creature I get back from my graveyard is Snapcaster Mage. I then cast Snapcaster Mage to recast Cruel Ultimatum and hit him for the last 5 in turn 5 of turns. And that is why I love Cruel Ultimatum.
Just casually sitting on 20 mana.
I had literally exactly enough mana, which is 16 for those of you playing at home. It had gone that long. That's one of my favorite Cruel Ultimatum stories.
That's fantastic. Well, Blake, thank you so much for joining us today. Really quickly, if people wanted to see more stuff that they do, where can they find you?
Like I said earlier in the show, I'm on Weekly MTG. It's Thursdays at 2:30 Pacific time, and we're on twitch.tv/magic. I'm not really writing for dailymtg.com anymore, but if you see a byline that says by Wizards of the Coast, that might be by me. And then on Twitter, I am at Blake PR.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for our episode today. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. A reminder that this podcast is brought to you by you with your support at the Patreon over at patreon.com/loadingreadyrun. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.